Chapter 3 covers different types of sentences. Now, in order to understand different types of sentences, you first need to understand what a clause is, because the way we categorize different kinds of sentences is based on what kinds of clauses make up those sentences. So a clause is a group of words that has a subject and has a verb. So, for example, Avita plays the guitar has both a subject, Avita, that's who is doing the action of the sentence, and a verb, plays. So this is a clause because it has a subject and a verb. There's two kinds of clauses. The first kind is an independent clause. Because it's a clause, it has a subject and a verb. What makes it independent is that it can stand on its own and make sense on its own. It's a complete sentence. So Avita plays the guitar makes sense by itself, so it's an independent clause. If you look below that, we have since Helen came home. This again is a clause because it has a subject, Helen, and a verb, came. But if that were by itself, since Helen came home, it doesn't make sense. It can't stand alone. It can't be punctuated as though it's a complete sentence. So this is the second kind of clause, which is a dependent clause. That means it relies on an independent clause to make sense. It cannot stand by itself. So the way to turn this dependent clause into a complete sentence is to add an independent clause onto it. So for example, I could say, since Helen came home, her mother was happy. Now it is a complete sentence, it makes sense, and it's made up of two different clauses. A dependent clause, since Helen came home, attached to an independent clause, her mother was happy. In addition to clauses, there's also a group of words called a phrase. The difference between a phrase and a clause is that a clause has both a subject and a verb, where a phrase is just a group of words that go together. It has neither a subject or a verb. So for example, after class. That doesn't have a subject and it doesn't have a verb, so it's what's called a phrase. There are 4 different kinds of sentences, and in this class we're going to talk about 3 of them. So the first type is a simple sentence. Again, the way you're going to distinguish between the sentence types, simple, compound, complex, is based on the kinds of clauses within those sentences. So a simple sentence is made up of one independent clause. This is a simple sentence. It has only one clause, okay? This is a different kind of sentence because it's made up of more than one clause. So right now I want to talk about simple sentences. It's just one independent clause. Simple. This sentence down here, even though it has more than one subject and more than one verb, it can't be broken into more than one clause, so it's still a simple sentence. For example, the subject of this sentence is my mother and sister. The predicate or the verbs in the sentence are came to the play and applauded the performers. So this is still a simple sentence because it's one independent clause. I cannot break it into more than one clause the way I can break this one into more than one clause. So simple sentence means one independent clause. Next I want to talk about compound sentences. A compound sentence is made up of 2 independent clauses, and it can be joined in one of 3 ways. The first way you can join those 2 independent clauses is with a comma and a word called a coordinating conjunction. The way you can remember your 7 coordinating conjunctions is with the acronym FANBOYS. The 7 coordinating conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So again, with a compound sentence, one way to join the 2 independent clauses is with a comma and one of these words, fanboys or coordinating conjunctions. So let me give you an example. In this sentence, this is a compound sentence. It has two independent clauses because I is the subject, woke is the verb, I is the subject, ate is the verb. So I have two independent clauses, two complete sentences that are joined with a comma and a fanboy, or a coordinating conjunction. So it's a compound sentence. That's one way to form a compound sentence, is with a comma and a fanboy. The second way is to join them with a punctuation mark that's called a semicolon. Now I still have a compound sentence, two independent clauses, and they're joined with this punctuation mark. A semicolon can go anywhere that a period could go, but the word that comes after it is going to be lowercased because it still is in the middle of a sentence. The reason I is capitalized here is because it's a personal pronoun, but if it were a different word, that would still be lowercased. The third way to form a compound sentence is again with a semicolon, but also with a word called a transition word. And so let me give you an example of that. I still have two independent clauses, which means I have a compound sentence, but now I've joined them with a semicolon, a transition word, and a comma. Okay, so now I have a compound sentence. That's the third way to form a compound sentence. So far we've talked about simple sentences made up of one independent clause, compound sentences made up of two independent clauses, and the third kind of sentence, the final kind of sentence for this class, is a complex sentence. A complex sentence is made up of one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Remember, the difference between those clauses is an independent clause could stand on its own. Both of these could be complete sentences by themselves. A dependent clause cannot stand on its own. Even though it has a subject and a verb, it doesn't make sense by itself. So for example, because I woke up early. That doesn't make sense by itself. It would need more information to be a complete thought, even though it has a subject and a verb. This is a dependent clause. A complex sentence is made up of a dependent clause and an independent clause. Now I have a complex sentence because I have this dependent clause, because I woke up early, and this independent clause, I am very tired. Just as an aside, the way to know that you have a complex sentence is that it's going to start with one of these words called a subordinating conjunction. And subordinating conjunctions can be found in your textbook on page, I believe, 28, okay? Because it's a subordinating conjunction. Other examples of subordinating conjunctions are words like ever since, even though, before, after, although. There's many words that fall in this category, and again, in your textbook on page 28, there's a list of them. But these words, subordinating conjunction, take clauses and make them dependent. Because I woke up early cannot stand on its own. That's why that's a dependent clause. I am very tired could stand on its own as a complete sentence, so it's independent. A complex sentence is made up of a dependent clause and an independent clause. So that finalizes the three different types of sentences you'll be responsible for in this class: a simple sentence, a compound sentence, and a complex sentence.